So now let's get into the product short form warnings. So there are lots of different verbiages out there for Prop 65 warnings. It's a big long paragraph, but if you're placing a marking on the product, you're allowed to use what's called a short form warning. And what you see on the screen now is what we have had up until now, which is basically just the hazard symbol with the word warning, cancer and reproductive harm, or if it's just one of those, you could say cancer or reproductive harm, and then link to the website. You'll notice that there's no requirement to put any kind of information into this warning about what we're exposing them to. We just let them know, hey, you might be exposed to something that causes cancer. However, what's happened with this is that people are looking at this warning and going, well, if I am subject to an enforcement action, I might be facing tens of millions of dollars in settlement fees. So I'm just going to go ahead and stick this thing on my product so that I have no risk of legislation, no risk of an enforcement action. Nobody can come after me. That resulted in overuse. Companies are just throwing a sticker on everything, and now the sticker means nothing. So in order to end that practice, OEHHA produced this new amendment, which is going to change this warning. However, this existing warning can still be used on any product that's manufactured and labeled prior to January 1st, 2028. So what does this new warning look like then? Well, here's some examples. Now, there is some alternate verbiage that you can choose from, and I've given you some examples here. Risk of cancer from exposure to, or can expose you to this chemical, which is a carcinogen, right? So you have different ways of formatting this, but you can see the elements of the warning symbol, the word warning is still there. But the big change is that you now have to provide the name of the substance, and you can see that here. Can expose you to lead, can expose you to nickel, can expose you to PFOS, whatever the chemical is under exposure risk. You have to now disclose that. This became effective January 1st, meaning you can use these labels today. But as we mentioned before, it will not be required on any products manufactured until and labeled after January 1st, 2028. And the date of sale doesn't matter, it's the manufacture date. So we can continue to use the old warning until January 1st, 2028, but at any time in between now and then, we can transition to these new warnings. There is another change here where you can indicate that this is actually just a California warning. There was some feedback from industry to OEHHA that they felt it was heavy-handed to place a warning on here without designating that this is only a California applicable warning. In other words, this is something provided in California only. So you can use the words CA warning or California warning to indicate this is for California itself. Now, when you're putting these labels together, you'll notice that there's the exposure to the name of chemical for risk of cancer, and then there's a name of chemical for reproductive harm. You have to provide at least one substance for each exposure type if there's an exposure risk. If, for example, there's one substance that's in there that's a cancer-causing chemical, but there are no reproductive harm chemicals, then you leave the reproductive harm element of the warning out, and you only say, hey, this can expose you to lead, which is a carcinogen, and you leave out the and a reproductive toxicant. If you have multiple substances that have exposure risk, you just have to list one for each exposure type. So minimum one for cancer, minimum one for reproductive harm, if there are those exposure types present. And as you can see, what this does is it compels product producers to perform their due diligence to determine exactly which hazardous substances are present. You can't just stick a label on your product anymore because you have to know what substance to warn them about. This amendment provided some other changes too regarding catalog purchases and internet purchases. And basically what those changes do is they've changed the verbiage a little bit and how you can clearly associate that with the item, and where you can provide, say in the case of internet purchases, do you have to provide a full warning? Do you have to provide just a short form? If it's on the product as a short form, you can provide the short form. You can provide a link at the listing on the internet to another warning, as long as the hyperlink is using the word warning or California warning. So there's these kind of changes to the listings as well. So not only are you providing the product marking to the product, but at the point of purchase, you need to be providing that as well. There's also different verbiage if you're providing parts for passenger off-highway vehicles and marine vessels. So if you're producing those kind of vehicles or parts for those vehicles, I encourage you to go back and take a look at the regulation, because the short form warning isn't the same.
Watch the full-length video and gain access to our full archive of educational webinars at greensofttech.com/videos. And while you're there, learn about our premier solutions for environmental regulation compliance.